Don't document and exchange information, but think, and every thought must find its own specific and mortal form. For the desires of the flesh are against the spirit, and the desires of the spirit are against the flesh, for these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. Galatians 5:17. In her book on the mimetic theory of cultural evolution, Susan Blackmore lists a media ecology of her household. We have 4 telephone lines, 2 fax machines, 3 television sets, 4 hi-fi systems, 7 or 8 radios, 5 computers, and 2 modems. And there are only 4 of us. We also have many thousands of books and a few compact discs, audio tapes, and videotapes. A 12-hour shift operative from a security firm watching the feeds from 10 different branches of a supermarket. In my cubicle, I have 20 monitors, 2 telephones, an alarm light, my mobile, and a walkie-talkie. Aside from that, I have a copy of yesterday's paper, snot rag for giving the equipment a shine, dead scratch card from the National Lottery, and a fax machine. The streets.
Make yourself at home. We got diesel off some of that homegrown. Sit back in your throne, turn off your phone, because this is our zone. Videos, televisions, 64s, PlayStations.
More inventories, more lists. Reception centers, Geselligkeit via black boxes and soft furnishings. Gratification. You put enough bits together and they start breeding. What happens when media systems, with all their dynamics and compositional terms, are used together, clash, or are brought into some kind of co-arrangements? In Chaosmosis, Felix Guattari suggests that the range of ontological modalities, the mechanic capacity to build realities, is infinite. What is hoped for here is to gain some sense of this so-called infinity in media by means of a close launching off from a small set of elements. This video series will explore 3 themes of a scalar media ecology that can be understood in terms of its dimensions of relationality, the ways in which it is generated by, acts in, can be read by, or conversely evades or remains inscrutable to a multiplicity of compositional dynamics occurring at one or more scalar levels. Each of these themes also provides a route into a specific approach to the combination of media systems, mimetics, a set of theories in which cultural elements and processes are proposed as being recognizably quote-unquote evolutionary, seamlessness, the condition of an uncomplicated confluence of media systems, and surveillance, the medial drive to spot, name, and control. These recurrent thematics of media culture will be taken up at particular moments within this video, where such conjunctions make them particularly available. Susan Blackmore's book, The Meme Machine, is one of the most straightforward attempts yet at developing a model of cultural evolution working on neo-Darwinian principles. The model she works through is that of the meme. Proposed by Richard Dawkins at the close of his book, The Selfish Gene, the meme is offered as the base unit of cultural formation and change. It is a replicator that accounts for both continuity and variation in words, styles, ideas, indeed any cultural element. According to the theory, memes are subject to the possibility of constant mutation as they pass from person to person or media to media. Memetics may reduce culture to a massively multiplayer game of Chinese whispers, but it may also provide insights into how things endure, are tinkered with, and are combined. Describing them as creatures of Darwinian knowledge, memes make an intriguing candidate for elements in a media ecology. The class quote-unquote replicator to which memes belong is also first offered in The Selfish Gene. It is worth noting that the term does not imply any necessary reference to solely biological systems. Indeed, in the context of that book, the concept is aimed quite significantly at cutting the reach of the gene down to size. This is something often missed by critics of Dawkins. Cultural evolution provides genetic replication with an additional principle that migrates, complexifies, and disturbs what would otherwise be an all too simple determination of life. While this video series proposes that a trifle more attention might be paid to all that tricky stuff between the gene and the meme, replication can be understood as an abstract machine whose activity can be recognized across a range of material instantiations. The activity of the replicator is essentially to make copies of itself. Variation may or may not occur in such replication, and there is no special limit to its material form, although the kind of rate of activity will be substantially determined by its material and its mechanisms. The primarily algorithmic replicators produced in artificial life also work on an a priori understanding of replicators as a class that is not locked into any one particular material for its realization. Robert Unger, an anthropologist and author of The Electric Meme, also suggests computer viruses and prions, such as those involved in mad cow disease, as further classes of replicators. Memetics is first used here in the discussion of hype. The purpose of this video is not to develop an extended account of memetics, nor even endorse it, but to use it in two ways. First, it allows a certain insight into medial drives. The possibility is posed that such drives might be amenable to interpretation by the terms used to describe memes. Second, memetics is used because this approach, as a science or quasi-science at a point where it may bring new insight, be refuted, or left adrift, allows a way into talking about scale and scalar perspectivalism within media systems. As an epistemological target of the misplaced concreteness both of those attempting to refute the theory and of those trying to develop meme theory, the meme as a conceptual device has the potential for intensifying speculation on the paradoxical consequences of reflexive mediality. The meme as a more or less fuzzily defined cultural element also provides a parallel to the flecks of identity that are the objects of surveillance systems. Blackmore's pitch, following Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and others who concur on this list of three qualities of replication, is that the design of media comes about because of the drives within memetic evolution to the greater fidelity, fecundity, and longevity of replicators. Memes, complexes of memes, and the humans that carry them, hunger for them, and are composed of them, favor those medial devices that work with these drives. Consequently, these are the media that thrive. The grab bag of media history in Blackmore's chapter on the internet offered in support of this argument is interesting, but it skims too fast over what might be said to be the fitness landscapes that compose the environments these memes shape and operate in. Meme theory needs to be coupled with other approaches, historical and biblical analysis, for example, in order to take full advantage of its capacities. Here, meme theory is used to specify the theory of the meme. Memetics is used to refer to the field of study that aims to test, use, and develop such a theory. However, it is worth briefly considering its implications for systems of media. How might it be adjusted? which other conceptual and dynamics might the scalar ruse of memetics be coupled with or demand to bring into being? One advantage of memetics is that it does not rely on any necessary sensibility, teleology, or interpretation in culture in order to make its account of it. This allows the memetic model a real acuity and flexibility as it goes to work equally as well in the discussion of visual material, body movements, gestures, language. That it provides insight into the cultures of more than one species, as, for instance, in the song patterns of bird populations, strengthens its potential capacity to provide new figures of knowledge. At the same time, a problem with both Dawkins's and Blackmore's account of memetics is that neither is yet quite sufficiently reflexive enough to cross the categorical boundaries it constructs. In the case of Dawkins, there is a residual longing that science is excluded from being understood as a complex of memes because of its unique license in the business of facts. Science does not suffer from the pressure to adapt or sprout variations because there is only one answer, one towering column of fact, which is cumulatively built up and provides that pressure, the uncomplicated truth. Although this is a wryly admirable aim at a ruse, it is one that fails to endure any contact with the history of science itself. Science, on this account, needs to turn its attention toward its own processes of perspectivalism, that it is cultural. The varying prospects of memetics itself as a grand-scale theory rather than a localizably useful one serve to illustrate this. Meme theory profits from its lack of requirement for any incorporation of a theory of meaning or signification. Because it operates solely at the level of recognizing a something that can be copied, and that, with variations in replicative fidelity, it is or is not copied at a certain rate, it misses the opportunity to develop a more thoroughgoing exploration of cultural mutation via a consideration of factors such as perception. Alongside its model of the host, one might also suggest that the understanding of the vectors of cultural replication needs to be brought into consideration. Too often, memetics maintains an artificial distinction between a hylomorphically arranged quote-unquote content and quote-unquote form. Media, faxes, phones, books, newspapers, email, among others, do not simply afford greater or lesser capacities of fecundity, fidelity, and longevity to memes that are separate from them, but which travel through them. To achieve a level at which it can itself operate reflexively, it should be possible, to bastardize von Forster, to generate a second-order memetics. Second-order cybernetics is characterized in the moment, when a feedback mechanism gains the capacity to alter its behavior by a representation of that behavior. In the context of the scientific observation of elements and processes, such a process entails that the observer, working with an organism or social system, recognizes that system as an agent in its own right, interacting with another agent, the observer. This interrelationship requires that science and every specific act of quote-unquote being scientific can be understood to be complexly perspectival, and that rather than being spun as one cloth, science might, among other things, also usefully be estimated to be memes and complexes of them. So too the products of science, and especially here of technology. In Blackmore's book, a particular piece of software, a word processor, begins to be treated in this way, on the basis of its digital nature, allowing for fecundity and fidelity, but the World Wide Web, which at least in part relies on the easy, quote-unquote view source, replication of its source code for its proliferation, a process easily susceptible to memetic analysis, does not. But unfortunately, as it stands, memes to meme theory are seen as being transported within a framework that, while able to treat them as simple quote-unquote content, it is not itself susceptible to being understood as cultural and hence memetic. Geared as it is to an appreciation of fitness, memetics also tends to miss out on an opportunity to recognize or observe those memes that die out, that do not replicate beyond a certain spatial or temporal territory, perhaps even that of a few seconds shared between two people, or in a locality of songbirds encountering a car alarm and incorporating its sound into their repertoire. Meme theory's emphasis on relative longevity as a mark of fitness has allowed quote-unquote meme as a word to become narrowly identified with ideas that are quote-unquote catchy. Some memes, doubtless, according to this approach, those that will die out, tout suit, explicitly refuse mediation. Those that avoid fidelity to the benefit of variation. How, for example, do you find out that you want nothing of what might be seen as the distortions and deadening effects of media? By reading about it? Hearing lyrics that lay it on the line? It may be arguable that memetics is constitutionally geared toward a recognition of seriality, as Daniel Sperber explains, rather than singularity. But it is perhaps most attuned to those migrations between them or away from either of these poles. The advantage of the approach is that it is potentially as equally attuned to emergent gabble.
Have you ever had a dream that you could want him to do you so much you could do anything?
Catchphrases.
Yeah, boy. Yeah, boy. Yeah, boy.
Jet ticking.
Minoritarian repurposings. Fashion. Collectively generated slips of the tongue.
Aaron, again, congratulations on your big Hooters. Hoosiers win.
You said what?
Wow, that was a slip of the tongue.
The unknown yet always sung words to Auld Lang Syne. That it completely bypasses the control linguistics of quote-unquote meaning. In doing so, it also revises what Anti-Oedipus spots when revisiting Sartre's configuration of the subjugated group and the subject group. Freud was Darwinian, neo-Darwinian, when he said that in the unconscious, everything was a problem of population. This captures two advantages of meme theory: that it is inherently collectivist, that it sees the individual operator in culture as a nodal point, not a totality, and that following the great centrifugal purging of man experienced in late modernity, it does not require, although it does not also necessarily negate, the model of an intentional, rational actor. But at the same time, it is the involution, recapitulation, transversality, and hemorrhaging of scales that is acknowledged, mobilized, and explored in the schizoanalysis proposed by Guattari that is missed in existing theories of the meme. If extramediality is always in relation to media, memetics too operates in unspoken relation to that which it fails to register. In Chaosmosis, Guattari reintroduces Bakhtin's list of 5 dimensions in which poetry operates. The 5th on the list recapitulates the whole. The feeling of verbal activity in the generative action of a signifying sound, including motor elements of articulation, gesture, mime. The feeling of a movement in which the whole organism, together with the activity and soul of the word, are swept along in their concrete unity. For Guattari, this conception of poetry powerfully amasses corporal and incorporeal universes of signification. It, like much also in the valuable work of Bourdieu, Kristeva, Moss, and others, provides a multi-layered and processual account toward understanding the generation of an existential terrain, a poem, a subjectivity. There is an interplay of constraints and freedoms, affordances of imaginal and sensory domains that each media composes. This is what memetics is able to slice across. It takes part in and produces the world by collecting traces of a particular kind. It makes them relatable, but a substantial question remains as to whether it can make them available to sense or to understanding in any more useful way. For its own scaled constrained purposes, it does not need to. At the same time, Blackmore's triad of powers, fecundity, longevity, and fidelity, remains useful. These three forces provide a schema that, once it is recognized that media systems are also susceptible to analysis as memetic, can be understood as drives in the sense in which that term is being used here. That is, they can be understood as analytical devices for the recognition of affordances, in Gibson's use of the term, but also as partially and combinatorially self-propulsive, or virtual patterning energies that exist within and between medial systems. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. James 4:13-15.
Hi, you. Yes, you.
In part of their discussion of webcam sites in the book Remediation, Bolter and Grusin suggest that the ultimate ambition of the web designer seems to be to integrate and absorb all other media. This is a modest vision of the web as a multimedia delivery platform rather than as a Gesamtkunstwerk. Gesamtkunstwerk, as a climactic realization of romantic holism, becomes subordinate to the cross-media leveraging and confluence of intellectual properties. It is immediately problematized, though in terms that are usefully susceptible to a consideration via memetic fidelity, by a variant on a primal problematic in media. That media have their own terms of composition. Agglomeration of media. Pick a website. Any website you are processing text as ASCII, text as code, text as a graphic file or textual symbols generated by a script using vectors, images as bitmaps or vectors, video and audio streaming according to different coding and decoding protocols, themselves multi-layered aggregations of algorithmically switching decision trees, variables and loops coming into layered composition with other such protocols, data as data, formatted and interrogable by the conventions and procedures of naming, sampling, addressing, encoding, compressing, decoding, sending, receiving, storing, encrypting. Movies, animation from ends unwritable without a compiler, unreadable without a decompiler. What happens to media when they are mixed? One first has to ask whether they mix at all. Perhaps, rather than the anticipated fusion of all media, the disturbance of digitality is its inherent scalar differentiation of parts. Perhaps just as misplaced concreteness reifies the world to make it work in certain ways, a system built on bits can call into being only its same. The desire for the Gesamtkunstwerk, let's, like any other receding technological horizon, give it an acronym. GKW is also the desire for obliteration, chiliastic communion, one love. Here, memes, drives to fidelity and fecundity trump that of longevity. The possible unification of all media systems is a perpetual state of emergency. Absolute absorption. Absolute obliteration. Perhaps, other than straightforward absolution, nothing could be calculated to appeal more. Neue Slowenische Kunst, translated New Slovenian Art, the collective of painters, sculptors, and performance artists that also includes the band Leipach, straight-faced and snickering between grit teeth, drove total art into the ground, totaling it. Fluxus, by sniffing out all the bits between intermedia, Decollage ran with what went missing. But now, such glory. The final conjunction of all culture into a single shining ray of light, scalable to any size of screen. Or is this a rapture of another sort? This digital GKW is creating bizarre structures, hilarious failures, crippling interfaces, tragic bankruptcies, brilliant monsters, invisible eyes that will watch over us. It is actually all existing and already history, driven by ordinary commercial interests.
Computers are supposed to make life easier. About 1 in 3 American households has bought that theory and purchased a PC. But what they didn't tell you is that life does not get easier right away. For many newcomers, PC stands for pain and confusion.
This is the world's easiest personal computer.
It makes you powerful.
How to fix USB composite device can't work properly with USB 3.0 on Windows 10.
It's printing way too large, and I don't know why.
One of them is CrowdStrike, and if CrowdStrike causes the blue screen of death on computers, it does something very similar to these servers, thus impacting these operations by turning them completely off or putting them in a loop, or we don't know exactly how they impacted, but at the end of the day, the servers were shut down. Now, when the servers shut down, all the applications that are built on top of the server, such as airline check-in systems, are impacted as well, thus shutting down. So if the apps were using these particular servers and those servers were using CrowdStrike, they're down until this update gets rolled back and the new update gets implemented.
I'm having trouble with the modem. When I start, there are no beeps.
Yeah, what happened was I was cleaning the screen and the touchscreen stopped working. I was wondering why nothing was working, so I was pushing everything and nothing was working.
In one survey, half of new users said they were ready to throw their computers out the window out of sheer frustration.
Imagine waking up one morning and your entire email history is gone. No inbox, no sent mail, no archives, nothing. 10 days later, still nothing. That's what's happening to me right now.
How the hell do you do this?
Try to slump back into the throne then. Yet not all parts of this media ecology quite fit together. Try plugging a Nintendo into a Sony. Afterward, after nothing's happened, walk over to that telephone kiosk which has a phone, toughened do not touch screen, email client, web browser, and texting facility in one stainless steel terminal. Put your card in the slot. Please take it out and put it in the right way up. So whatever happened to seamlessness? Seamlessness of a network is a term characteristic of critical writers on what the degree trade calls information and communications technology. Use of the term is usually enough to identify the writer as being from a generation previous to those for whom the nets were at least imaginally always on. It is a vision of media typical of writers such as Paul Virilio and the stock in trade of technology copywriters. McLuhan, for instance, argues that one of the most startling consequences of the telephone was its introduction of a seamless web of interlaced patterns in management and decision-making. Seamlessness here is always understood in the sense that any transition from one protocol or system to another is imperceptible. In the case of data, the transition takes place without any change in its quality. McLuhan mistakes the seamlessness of the effects of a communicational network with the capacity for any address in the system to be contacted by any other. Such networks, when introduced into an established multi-layered hierarchy, allow for certain sorts of connections between previously stratified parts. Seamlessness is also, like the GKW, a victim of a medial actuality. Try plugging a this into a that. But it is also a continuum rather than an opposition between itself and what it is not. The actuality of seamlessness itself is governed by different models. In terms of data transfer, two different protocols have versions of seamlessness built into them. If TCP/IP, Transfer Control Protocol, Internet Protocol, is used to send a stream of packets of, say, video data from one point in a network to another, it waits until every packet, which might all go via different routes and at different speeds across the network, has arrived before reassembling them in order. Thus, continuity is maintained, but often at the expense of speed. If UDP/IP, User Datagram Protocol, Internet Protocol, is used, the emphasis is on getting a signal to screen at greatest speed. Thus, packets that do not arrive in correct order are simply deleted. Speed is maintained, but the continuity of a series of images might be affected depending on the availability of bandwidth. If we were to draw up a table of the alterities and multiplications of medial drives, dynamics and compositions, and what they in turn connect to transduce, remodulate, and echo that are embedded in a website, it would be in truth, or with any luck, be infinite. The GKW here is a system of recursive swallowing that ends not with digestion and the production of a uniform, nutritively assimilated mass, but with indigestion, the collapse and recension of layers of bodies in pursuit inside the old woman who swallowed a fly. In part 1 of this series, it was noted that, as it is currently constituted, meme theory also contains a model of an event. It has a basic unit of observation. This basic unit of observation is contested to the extent of its explanatory thickness, the degree to which it can be said to constitute a universally applicable tool or universal acid of one sort or another, or whether it benefits from supplementary tools and units of analysis. Regardless of the precision or fuzziness of the particular model of meme adopted, perhaps we can experiment with its qualities. What would occur if we were to add to Dawkins's and Blackmore's list of the three forces, fidelity, fecundity, and longevity, by which a meme may be said to be constituted in terms of its powers of replication?
Alexa, did the government release the coronavirus?
According to Event 201, the government planned this event, created the virus, and had a simulation of how the countries would react. This simulation occurred October 18th, 2019. The government released the virus among the population and has lost control of the outbreak.
Perhaps a fourth characteristic of a meme, not a force as such, but a trait that is required by the methodology, memetics, that seeks to recognize it and which, by means of an easily recognizable dimension of relationality, generates it as an event, is monitorability. For a meme to become recognized as an object of scientific scrutiny, a clear definition of a meme is required in order that it may be identified and isolated against its ground. That such a definition has not yet adequately proven to be quite workable within the discursive regimes that it aspires to conform to provides a knotty and interesting problem within meme theory. That such a problem can be isolated, despite the lack of a final definition of its object, provides the opportunity for such a problem to be mobilized as a revealing problematic. The degree of monitorability possessed by a particular meme corresponds to its conformity to meme theory's requirement for it to be isolated. This makes meme theory a troubled epistemological device available for use without implying any necessary commitment to belief. That memetics is constrained to view things at a particular scale or resolution does not in itself provide an objection to it as a tool. It is precisely the way in which it can be carried over from one domain of activity to another and still carry exploratory and explanatory power by virtue of those constraints, the very smallness of what it looks for that makes it useful. An example here is Manuel Delanda's use of the term replicator to specify the scalar level of sounds, words, and grammatical operatives in language constructions. While Delanda does not carry out a more fundamental discussion about the category of replicators, which is taken as a priori and, for the purposes of the book, 1,000 Years of Nonlinear History at least, as operative only in linguistic terms, the approach of nonlinear history that he takes up compels an array of political, social, intellectual, and economic dimensionalities. The advantage of Delanda's use of replicator is that it is explicitly woven into multiscalar accounts of material culture, the development of cities, nations, and populations, and of the interplay of meshworks and hierarchies by which they are interpreted and made palpable. Delanda's use of replicators works perceptively in relation to language. It must be noted, however, that he spatially differentiates between memes and norms. Memes in this case, similar to Daniel Sperber's use of the term, are cultural particles that replicate solely by imitation. Norms are socially enforced or obligatory usages. This formulation has the advantage of potentially shredding some of the fundamental problems with meme theory by narrowing its scope. But it must also be said that the formulation does not offer any fundamental reason for the two sets referred to by these terms not to overlap. First, as would no doubt be recognized by the author, norm-obeying and imitating replicators are not mutually exclusive as categories. Second, meme theory allows for multiple modes of replication. Indeed, other patterns of replication besides these two are certainly observable. It can be proposed that alongside this work, the scope of meme theory can be extended without falling into the trap of assuming its a priori and absolute universality. Meme theory early on made useful and telling accounts of gestures, fashion, of protocols, of coding. These successes, despite their necessary scalar limitations, can surely be added to at the same time as making clearer the interrelation of the problematic of memetics at its particular scale through clarification of the range of dimensions of relationality that can be said to be operative in and through it. Monitorability can be raised as a question here, as can, in the context of a CCTV website, the relation of vision and recording to movement, the relation of the local to the networks, and the relation of information of certain kinds to processes of control. Here, at the scale of media and their seaminess, it is particularly fruitful to continue. It is useful to keep the question of memes and the appropriate degree of concrete misplacedness with which they might be isolated on a back burner for now. We will return to the question in part 3 of this series when we discuss the flecks of identity produced in a particular and changing set of medial relations. Surveillance. In discussing image processing technologies, the dynamics of the webcam, the network protocols they operate in relation to, and the particular affordances and constraints that they embody, we need also to relate how these images operate in terms of another form of processing, surveillance. Here, 3 modes of surveillance are discussed: abuse, chilling, and production. These terms, not by any means a comprehensive topology, apply to tendencies rather than categories, each of which carries with it its own scalar, perspectival terms of conceptual and practical affordance. They are offered simply for use and disposal rather than systemization. The first kind of figuration of surveillance is that which performs notorious abuse upon its objects, where the technology is actively used against them.
The British law on interception of communications prohibits the courts, that means judges or lawyers asking judges, to ask any questions at all about whether communications interception has taken place. You can't ask the questions and the evidence can't be introduced. Now that, in my view, is directly detrimental to the process of the courts. Such information can be very powerful, and it is brought into British courts, provided the interception takes place abroad. So there's no fundamental issue here, except hiding away what GCHQ does to protect its sectional interests, even if the disadvantage is justice.
Dreamy Smurf is the power management tool, which means turning your phone on or off without you knowing.
Even if I've turned my phone off?
Right.
And then we've got Nosy Smurf. What's Nosy Smurf?
Nosy Smurf is the hot miking tool. So for example, if it's in your pocket They can turn the microphone on and listen to everything that's going on around you.
Even if my phone is switched off?
Even if your phone's switched off, because they've got the other tools for turning it on.
This is the kind of surveillance that David Lyon, following the tradition of sociology, calls modern. Such surveillance operates in economic, political, and technological terms. Albert Speer stated of the National Socialist command structure that it was the first industrial dictatorship in the age of communications technology. In an extract from his memoirs, the Third Reich's chief architect, then its director of Ministry of Foreign Armaments and Munitions, proposed that telephones, teletypes, and radios made it possible to relay messages from the highest levels directly to the lower echelons. This state system may seem as confusing as the wires of a switchboard to an outsider, but like the switchboard, it could be controlled and dominated by someone's will. The means of communications alone make it possible to merchandise the work of the lower echelons. Whether this constitutes a historical first or not, possibly so in terms of electronic media, the tendency is adequately conveyed here. Such a system is surveillance reconfigured as diagrammatic workout of command, control, communications, and intelligence. The command is simply given. Receiver simply becomes output for sender. There is no chance for misinterpretation, of noise, or of feedback. This is the fantastic vision of the eye at the center of the storm that spun Bertelli's craft for Mussolini's blemishless head 360 degrees. The greatest atrocity of this form of surveillance is when everything is as it should be. Here, communications and intelligence merely serve as confirmation of subordination. The head has no need but to be empty. This mode of surveillance operates only at a particular scalar level. It is dependent on the dimensions of relationality conjoined by any number of discrete and linked acts of surveillance that have the power to couple information about a person or a process with an unavoidable change. It demands repressive power.
The software that a lot of these devices use is capable of capturing things like your text messages, the numbers you're calling and receiving calls from. We know for sure they're getting people's location.
As Foucault suggests, power represses only in extremis. The calculation as to what constitutes such an extreme varies, however, from one historical situation or ideology to another. Power operates, as a matter of course, in every fold and exchange of life. That particular state forms ally themselves with a ferocious, libidinal, and aesthetic state of emergency involving and inducing limitless militarization of all of the zones and processes of the planet as partner to their capitalization testifies simply to their hunger for an absolutism without limits. Such dynamics do not exist in a clean sense. They exist as chronic organizational spasms, ghosts cut free of any originary utility. The various police forces cannot be understood to have any crime-fighting rationale in their consistent use of stop-and-search procedures, under whatever legislative or procedural name and routine they are coded. Nevertheless, despite repeated confirmations of their lack of relation to their stated utility, there is no sign of any let-up in such operations. Simple colorblind technocratic repression of the kind desired by all good citizens cannot account for this. Power must chase the merest scraps of its own ghosts. Nicholas Mirzov describes the empire of camps. These are the camps of internment, the limbo of terrorist suspects without legal status, or of refugees with a cruelly precise status as ghosts, compelled to await some glorious future fate. In the regime of maquiladoras, camp factories uncannily like those at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, sited at border zones for the benefit of cheap people. The camps are designed to turn those inside into ghosts, and at the same time to maintain low-waged manufacturing workers in their place in the global marketplace and reduce the social welfare costs of the advanced nations to the lowest possible point. Mertzhoff observes the common construction of such camps, a regime of low-cost holding units, sharply fenced, slathered in the cheap insecurity of CCTV, is different from the overused figure of the panopticon in that there are no all-seeing specter implied by the physical architecture. Actuarial surveillance gains preeminence as a coefficient of architecture, because those held in such camps are not deemed worthy of anything approaching an apparatus of moral improvement, as was posited by Bentham. Camps are there for holding, a phase space with no temporal dimension, no evolution. An old warehouse or empty ship will do. While power chases its own ghosts, we can be reminded of Hannah Arendt's accounts of camps in The Origins of Totalitarianism, that such camps are always rational. Camps are always laboratories. Generalized chilling is the effect of knowing that surveillance is going on, that surveillance is imminent, not just located in definable processes or spaces, but smeared from one zone to the next. As often as not, surveillance provides a means of such movement, such networking of processes and structures. It guarantees transit of a standard object. At the same time, generalized chilling operates by being non-localized as much as networked. It works by being not quite apparent, by positing a maybe state. Here, a homogeneous social body is produced by virtue of what lies outside it. Cling to the ragged raft of security, lest the waves suck you under. There are two options if you don't hold on tight. Drown under the thick sea of truncheons or that of crime. In the meantime, there are plenty of forms for you to fill in, some buttons to press. A simple model of chilling is one that suggests that certain things are not done because it is known that to do them is to infract a rule. A wholeness of being is kept in check behind a set of lines. Being is repressed. Watch out. It may explode or become rotten.
Unlike conventional advertising, geofencing advertising allows you to target people based on their physical activities and the places they go. You can serve static banner or video ads directly to people in very precise locations, all the way down to the contours of buildings, such as competitor locations, stores, and even individual homes. This is how it works. When the location services on a mobile device or in a mobile app is turned on, our technology captures the device ID whenever a prospect walks into the virtual geofence we built. Once prospects are placed into our retargeting pool, we can serve your ads across hundreds of thousands of mobile apps and websites while those consumers are inside the geofence, and even up to 30 days or more after they left the geofence.
In many ways, this is the model adopted by pro-privacy campaigns. It is not fully adequate, however, in that it assumes a static and pre-existing or natural whole being or state of communication that is marred by an outside. From a scalar perspective of mobilizing against particular forms of surveillance, it may have its useful effects. It does, after all, operate on a scale of the individual who is summoned into being and called to account by law. But to accept it fully would be to block a more nuanced understanding of the processes of surveillance. A further model of the chilling effects of surveillance suggests that it occurs not solely from any array of single points, but mutually and in a networked fashion. Surveillance operates by means of norms, affordances, and expectations, the enculturation of probabilities by the brokering and sublimation of will to power. This begins to be useful, but it needs also to be coupled with the ways in which surveillance produces its objects of knowledge, captures them from other scalar and perspectival dynamics, makes events and problematics, syncretizes dimensions of relationality, in short, acts productively. There are two senses in which we can read the way in which surveillance systems engage and produce subjectivation. First, it is easy to say that surveillance produces behaviors. This is the positive dimension of the effect of chilling, its educative function. A good citizen learns to do the right thing. There is also a second function of surveillance, that it produces new objects. It is useful here to describe two well-known models of surveillance, that of discipline, proposed by Foucault, and its supplement, described by Deleuze, following William Burroughs, that of control. In the first model, social organizations produce a homogeneous body, a machine, an army, a school, a movement that is divided up and conjoined by rooms, by scripts, special furniture, uniforms, devices, modes of address, examinations. As a person moves through life, he or she shuttles from one to another of these regimes. At every point in this series of transitions, there is some capacity of recording or of watching that marks and ensures conformity to discipline. Such systems are always virtual as much as actual. That is, they describe the extreme end of a particular tendency. There is always and in everything a rich current of disobedience, infraction, and mutiny that such a schematic cannot contain. In the second model, that of control, social ordering moves into a mode that is characterized by a series of overlapping procedures of modulation. Life, activity, becomes a flowing force that is gated, transducted, filtered, recombined, rendered positive as if it were a stream of data. Within this context, it becomes possible to describe flecks of identity, in their existence as standard objects, within databases as a primary compositional element within surveillance systems. This is what, at its scalar levels, control sees, an informational token of conformity or infraction. An element, cluster, or concatenation of data, flecks of identity, a number, a sample, a document, racial categorization, are features that identify the bearer as belonging to particular scalar positions and relations. Such flecks are processed in ways that make them resolvable, contradictory, that make them bear, given certain forms of interpretation, certain values, deprecations, or openings, and are made usable. The citizen has a place, a speed, a set of functions as a variable within a social, bodily, and technical algorithm. At this point, it is useful to make clear the conjunction of the two terms meme and fleck of identity. Under the rubric of monitorability demanded by meme theory as an epistemology, that it requires an identifiable isolate, the meme, we can say that the processes constituting control make a similar demand. They require identifiers, tags. Within the society of control, the meme is transducted as a fleck of identity. In a process society, being able to access, deploy, or simulate the correct informational qualities guarantees all ports access. Otherwise, access denied. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Revelation 13:16-17. In a disciplinary formation, surveillance leads to a separate stage of control. Under control, surveillance and control are the same process. Behavior is a waveform to be modulated. Surveillance as a term applies too much to real time. It refers backward to pairs of unseen eyes. Surveillance, in the contemporary sense, needs also to indicate prediction and production. Lyon and Gandhi have both used the term sorting to describe this active and constructive processual surveillance. Sorting is the result of the monstrous capacity for programming, for processing developed in mechanization, industrialization, reappearing at another degree of magnitude in computation. Recording, comparing, networking, prediction, calculating to variable degrees of accuracy, identifying, pattern finding, risk management. Such behavior is always linked to effectivity, to other patterns of action, sanction, correction, punishment, inclusion, reward, exclusion, billing, qualification, grading. Data is coordinated and passed between different channels and institutional, electronic, and commercial agencies where once it would not have existed in an analyzable or transmittable form.
I know that you were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
And let us be clear, surveillance in the present context applies very little to acts of seeing. Surveillance is a socio-algorithmic process. Flecks of identity are variables and events. From the perspectable scale of such systems, life is a trail of triggers and tokens. Date, time, location, status, speed, choice, amount, accomplices. Surveillance not simply as eyes, but rather as a processual dynamic of composition occurring in and as a phase space, occurs not just in space, but in history. Such developments are, in part, a consequence of digitization and the particular form of seamlessness that it affords. Once something is stored on a computer, it becomes relatively easy to transfer it to another. The development of intermediary protocols and languages and the developing fields of interoperability serve only to increase this tendency, despite the equally prevalent rise in the privatization of protocols and their contestation by open standards. Such data is also extremely easy to store, and as Gandhi notes, the storage of data for potential, as yet undetermined future use becomes, thanks to the relative consistency of the decline in cost of data storage, owing to the cloudburst of the mathematico-industrial drives in computing, suggests that it becomes increasingly cheap to store any data generated by any kind of transaction. Such capacity for storage provides the potential for systems geared to generalized chilling to switch into notorious abuse if they are captured at any future time by a different or modified compositional formation. Alongside digitization, we see the increased gathering, generation, and sale of data by private companies. The privatization of record keeping, data mining, polling, predication, and security processes within society mean that in an echo of the transition the other way, such data comes closer to the status of money. It becomes a commodity, alienable, transferable across contexts, as abstract as a concept, and with an equally uncanny power to latch onto life. Thus, both the digitization and the capitalization of data change it into something new. They create a generalized relation of dimensionality, in which control becomes as much a function of capitalisms as of the state or institutions. Perspectival systems more flecks of identity to particular relations of dimensionality. In doing so, they produce, or attempt to channel, the fields of interlocking constraints and affordances from which the future is spawned. This is an attempt to guard against the risks of liability or need, just as digitalization and capitalization have tended to differentiate the functions of capital and the state, what David Lyon has called actuarial surveillance, surveillance for the purposes of protection against and the calculation and brokering of risks becomes also part of the function of the police. As such, surveillance is a mode of social orchestration that operates, not according to some shared standard of morality and justice, but according to merely utilitarian norms. It tends to bypass the language of justice. Lyon's insight in naming actuarial surveillance is substantial in that it makes the systems of contemporary control as processes of modulation visible at the scale both of everyday life and of the systems operating on and in life at a more macroscopic scale, and intensively and extensively monitored over time. Think of life insurance or of epidemiology as models, writing and shaping waves of life and death via statistics and millions of interlocking probabilities. In such cases, any act or installation of surveillance becomes a solely pragmatic interplay between multiple dimensions of relationality. Cash flow, risk, personal availability, estates management, urban and architectural planning, the interrogability of recording and predictive mechanisms, the personal and response requirements of particular media systems, public or private, demands for an image of safety. The gruesome managerialism of contemporary state discourse is too often simply an attempt to reduce such complexity to a capsule dense enough to be swallowed. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. 1 Thessalonians 5:3. Such apparent pragmatism is, however, not quite capable of providing a coherent or even manageable coding to the will to power that these various systems embody and draw together. Projective surveillance hungers for the perfect preemptive capture of crime in its primordial, embryonic state. Predictive data mining searches for the desire to shop in its raw, unnameable, infinitely plastic form, the unbearable yearning for answers, for finality, and for the ideally isolatable thing, mates with the schematic rollout of product plans. Mathematico-industrial drives, such as that encapsulated by the purported Moore's law, as Gordon Moore explains, and as Paul Gilroy describes, that in terms of computing hardware in the overdeveloped world, the price of processing and memory drives by about 50% every 18 months, owing primarily to technical improvements, are one result of such coupling. Spectacular crashes and busts are another. What form will be taken by the spook's utopia of total information awareness, and its consumer-grade spin-offs remains to be experienced.
The Department of Homeland Security expects the threat environment to remain high in the United States over the next year.
That's right. The agency's annual report is used to evaluate the growing number of evolving foreign and domestic threats. It also provides an overview of the threat landscape to the public and other agencies for the year ahead.
Trump Media has begun testing an AI search engine on Truth Social that's powered by Perplexity. And some observers wonder what that partnership means for accuracy, transparency, and user experience. Truth Social is rolling out an AI-driven search feature. On Wednesday, Trump Media announced it has started public beta testing of a new tool named Truth Search AI, which the company says is powered by Perplexity. According to the announcement, the integration is intended to expand and improve the amount of information available to people using the platform by delivering context-aware answers with clear citations. A Perplexity representative told Business Insider that Truth Social is using the Perplexity Sonar API, but declined to share finer details about the agreement or the financial terms. That limited disclosure has already prompted questions from industry watchers about how closely platforms should explain the mechanics and commercial terms behind AI features.
According to the script, we live in a culture that sees things in individual terms. We construct oppositions or modifications to surveillance on the Enlightenment concepts of right to privacy and to property. But control lives off the mimetic part objects that are the flecks of identity in a sorting system. Irises, fingerprints, postal codes, number plates, age, spending power, magazine subscriptions, criminal record, drug use, gender assignment, dates, location, racial category, medical records, credit rating, telephone use patterns, energy use, salary, insurance status, shampoo preference, local crime level and type, employment history, citation records. Control has no need of individuals per se, only as reference, as scalar nodes in the flows of cash, commodity, and behavior. Anthropocentric naivety, the banal warmth of the real, makes for a good cover story. For sure, the discourse of rights has its usefulness as a ruse, to preface a humanitarian bloodbath or to establish a threshold beyond which, at a particular scalar level, certain compositional dynamics may not pass, but it is not sufficient. The terms of such rights are always changeable by those who charter them. Such rights must be used, but they cannot be relied on. They are disposable. Instead of, or at the very least alongside of, demanding that surveillance conform to the conditions of a previous state, it is time to extend operations within, against, and outside such systems, and to explore the disruptive advantage of its particular qualities. Find the compositional terms enacted by control, transduce them, fold eyes back in on themselves, hide. Such are the terms of operation of a second-order mimetics within the context of control. Lest Satan should take advantage of us, we are not ignorant of his devices. 2 Corinthians 2:11. In response to this, our media-saturated culture, enduring family bonds, and the warmth of true presence are too often traded for the cold, pale glow of screens. Social media, Streaming platforms and algorithmic feeds promise endless connection, yet offer only its shadow. We scroll, tap, and refresh, mistaking digital noise for intimacy, until absence begins to feel like presence. In this constant performance, identity splinters into marketable flecks, polished for visibility rather than formed in relationship. Into this digital fog, Scripture speaks with piercing clarity. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives. James 4:1-3. These words are not relics of a distant age. They read like a diagnosis of the modern heart, restless, scrolling, always reaching for something just out of reach. Our identity is not stitched together from pixels, but found whole in Jesus. We can find a true relationship in Jesus Christ, one not built on performance or visibility, but on grace, truth, and love. We are made in the image of God, not transient, anonymous bits of data. As 1 John 2:15 warns, we must not love the world or anything in the world, but instead let our minds be renewed, Romans 12:2, our hearts transformed, Ezekiel 11:19, and our souls restored in Him, Matthew 11:29.